Maya Carter's heart raced as she boarded the plane, knowing she was just one step away from capturing the most elusive criminal of her career. But as the engines roared to life, it wasn't the dangerous man seated in first class who became her biggest obstacle. It was the air hostess standing a few rows behind her, suspicious and watching her every move. One mistake, and the mission, and her dignity, would be destroyed. Before we get started, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let us know where you're watching from. Let's dive in. Maya Carter sat in the departure lounge, watching the bustle of passengers moving around her. Despite the activity, her mind remained razor-sharp, her focus entirely on the mission. As a seasoned FBI agent, Maya was no stranger to high-stakes situations. But this assignment was different. For months, she had been tracking a man known only as the Broker, a criminal mastermind who had evaded law enforcement for years. His network was vast, and his connections ran deep, spanning illegal trafficking operations that operated in the shadows of society. The information she had gathered had finally led her to this moment. She was about to board the same plane as the Broker, hoping to tail him undetected. Maya had prepared meticulously for this mission. Dressed in understated business attire, she blended seamlessly with the other travelers. A navy blue blazer over a white blouse, coupled with black slacks and a sleek laptop bag, gave her the appearance of a typical corporate professional. Her hair was pulled back into a simple, neat bun, and her demeanor was calm but alert. She wasn't here to draw attention to herself. She was here to do her job. As she rose from her seat and moved toward the boarding gate, Maya replayed the details of her plan in her mind. The Broker was dangerous, but he wasn't aware that the FBI was closing in on him. That was her advantage. He had booked a seat in first class, while she was seated a few rows behind in business class. It gave her the perfect vantage point to observe him without appearing suspicious. Her task was simple: follow him, stay close, and report his movements once they landed. Once on the plane, Maya discreetly glanced around, making mental notes of her surroundings. The Broker was already seated near the window in the first-class cabin, engrossed in his phone. His tall, imposing figure seemed relaxed, but Maya knew better than to underestimate him. He had slipped through the FBI's fingers before, always one step ahead, but not this time. She wouldn't let him get away. Maya settled into her seat, aware of the eyes around her, but used to the feeling. She had grown accustomed to being a black woman in spaces where she was often the only one, and she had learned to navigate the assumptions and judgments that sometimes followed. Today was no different. A few passengers gave her curious glances as she passed by, and even the flight attendants seemed to take a little extra notice of her. It was nothing new. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Maya allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. She pulled out her phone, sending an encrypted message to her team to confirm that she was in position. Everything was going according to plan. She leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes briefly, running through the details of the case in her head. The Broker was cautious, always traveling under different aliases, and his network was nearly impossible to infiltrate. But Maya had been patient, waiting for this exact moment. He didn't know she was on his tail, and that was her edge. The flight attendants moved through the aisles, checking on passengers and preparing for takeoff. One of them, a tall woman with sharp features and a crisp uniform, caught Maya's attention. There was something about the way she moved, authoritative, perhaps a little too rigid. The woman's name tag read Lisa. She seemed to be watching Maya, her eyes lingering a bit too long as she walked by. Maya's instincts kicked in, but she brushed the feeling aside. She couldn't afford to get distracted by something as trivial as an overzealous flight attendant. The plane began to taxi down the runway, and soon they were airborne. Maya kept her focus on the mission, her thoughts returning to the Broker. He was her priority. She couldn't afford to make a mistake now. Everything depended on her ability to remain unnoticed, to stay one step ahead of him without alerting him to her presence. A few minutes into the flight, Maya discreetly checked her phone again, making sure the signal was strong enough to send another update. She quickly typed a message to her FBI team, ensuring that they knew the flight was proceeding smoothly. As she hit send, she noticed movement from the corner of her eye. Lisa, the flight attendant, was walking down the aisle again, her eyes sweeping over Maya's seat. There was a subtle shift in her expression, something that Maya couldn't quite place. It wasn't just curiosity, it was suspicion. Maya kept her face neutral, not wanting to give anything away. She had dealt with people like Lisa before, people who made assumptions, who couldn't help but see her as different. But this wasn't the time to engage. Maya had a job to do, and she wasn't about to let anyone distract her from it. As Lisa passed by, Maya pretended to be absorbed in the in-flight magazine, her fingers casually flipping through the pages. But inside, her mind was racing. She couldn't afford any unnecessary attention, not when the stakes were this high. She would need to be even more careful now, making sure that her every move was calculated and discreet. The plane settled into its cruising altitude, and Maya relaxed slightly, but her vigilance never waned. She glanced over at the broker again, who was now speaking quietly to the flight attendant in first class. He seemed completely unaware of her presence, which was exactly how she wanted it. Lisa's footsteps echoed softly as she continued down the aisle, but this time she didn't look at Maya. For now, the moment of suspicion had passed. Maya let out a quiet breath, her focus sharpening once again. This mission was far too important to let a misunderstanding derail her. She had been chasing the broker for too long to let anything slip now. This was her chance to bring him in, to stop the web of crime he had spun across the country. And no matter what, she wasn't going to let anyone, not even a prejudiced flight attendant, get in her way. The flight continued smoothly, and Maya kept her eyes on the prize, ready for whatever came next. But deep down, she knew that this was only the beginning. Something told her that the real challenge was still ahead, and she would need every ounce of her skill and determination to see this mission through to the end. As she closed her eyes for a moment of rest, she couldn't shake the feeling that the tension in the air was about to break. And when it did, Maya would be ready. The plane had reached cruising altitude, and the passengers began to settle into their routines, reading, watching movies, or falling into the lull of quiet conversations. For Maya, though, the real work had just begun. She kept her attention split between the broker and the encrypted messages she sent to her team back at headquarters. Her goal was to remain unnoticed, but she knew that any slip could blow her cover, and worse, compromise the entire operation. Lisa, the air hostess who had been giving Maya suspicious glances, was making her rounds in the cabin again. This time, there was something in her gaze that Maya couldn't ignore. The subtle scrutiny had evolved into a pointed, uncomfortable stare. Maya shifted slightly in her seat, her instincts tingling. Lisa stopped near Maya's row, her presence unnerving but seemingly casual. "Miss, can I get you anything? A drink? Perhaps something to eat?" Maya shook her head politely. "No, thank you," she said, her voice calm but clipped. She kept her focus on her phone, where another message from the team had just come through. The broker hadn't moved, but that didn't mean Maya could let her guard down. Lisa hesitated, standing over her for a beat too long, before moving away. Maya exhaled silently, her mind racing. It wasn't the first time she had encountered overzealous staff in her years of undercover work, but Lisa's behavior was more than just a minor inconvenience. There was a charged air about her actions that Maya had seen before, often rooted in prejudice. Her presence was clearly unsettling Lisa for reasons that had nothing to do with her work and everything to do with assumptions. Maya took a deep breath, centering herself. She couldn't afford to be distracted by this. She had spent years perfecting her ability to blend in, to remain unremarkable. This was just another layer of the job, being underestimated, judged, or overlooked. If anything, it was something she had learned to use to her advantage, staying invisible to those who saw her only through the lens of their biases. But Lisa's attention didn't wane. As the flight wore on, Maya could feel the weight of the air hostess's suspicion intensifying. A few hours into the flight, as Maya discreetly stood up to stretch her legs, Lisa appeared almost immediately, blocking the narrow aisle. "Is everything all right?" Lisa asked, her tone laced with thinly veiled distrust. Maya resisted the urge to roll her eyes. She had simply stood up to stretch, just like half of the other passengers on the flight. "Yes, I'm fine," Maya replied, keeping her voice even. She looked past Lisa toward the first-class cabin where the broker was still seated, oblivious to the scene. Lisa didn't move. "I've noticed you've been watching other passengers," she said, her voice lowering to what she likely thought was a serious, professional tone. "Is there something I should know about?" Maya could feel her patience thinning. She kept her expression neutral. "I'm simply on a flight, just like everyone else," she said firmly, maintaining eye contact. She knew what was happening. Lisa was making assumptions based on Maya's appearance and quiet demeanor, assumptions that had no grounding in reality. Before Lisa could respond, another flight attendant called for her assistance. Maya took the opportunity to step around Lisa and move toward the back of the plane. She needed to stretch her legs, clear her head, and prepare for the final leg of this journey. She didn't have time to let Lisa's inappropriate questioning interfere with her mission. But Maya's brief reprieve didn't last long. As she walked down the aisle, Lisa's voice came through the intercom, announcing the meal service. Maya returned to her seat, pretending to be absorbed in a book. She wanted to avoid drawing more attention to herself. The broker was still where he needed to be. And that was what mattered most. However, Lisa's suspicions continued to fester. In her mind, Maya's composed and quiet nature only confirmed her paranoia. It didn't help that Maya had been focused on her phone earlier, or that she occasionally glanced toward the front of the plane. Completely normal behavior for someone on a long flight, but Lisa wasn't seeing things through a normal lens. Lisa leaned into the pilot's cabin, her voice barely a whisper. "I think we might have a problem," she said to the captain. "There's a woman on board. She's been acting strangely." The captain, clearly preoccupied with flying the plane, glanced at her briefly. "What kind of strange? You mean she's being disruptive?" "No, not disruptive. Just, I don't know. She keeps looking at other passengers on her phone a lot. Something feels off." The captain, more focused on the skies than Lisa's concerns, shrugged. "Just keep an eye on her. If she causes a disturbance, we'll deal with it when we land. But for now, let's not make a scene." Lisa nodded, but the seed of suspicion had already taken root. She was convinced there was more to Maya than met the eye, and she wasn't about to let it go. Back in her seat, Maya's fingers tapped out another quick message to her team. They were nearing their destination, and she had to be ready the moment the plane landed. The broker had yet to make any sudden moves, but Maya knew better than to get comfortable. He was an expert at disappearing the moment someone blinked. She couldn't allow that to happen. As she glanced at her phone, she caught sight of Lisa once more, hovering nearby. Maya's frustration built. Lisa had now crossed into harassment territory, and Maya could feel the weight of the scrutiny pressing down on her. It wasn't just a personal annoyance, it was a potential threat to her mission. If Lisa continued to involve herself, she could inadvertently expose Maya's identity, jeopardizing everything. The pressure was building, and Maya was running out of patience. But she knew she couldn't act rashly. Not here. Not yet. With only an hour left before the plane landed, Maya shifted in her seat, her nerves on edge. She knew the time was approaching where she'd need to make a move, and Lisa's baseless suspicions were only complicating things. Still, Maya couldn't let the air hostess's actions throw her off. This was bigger than a personal slight. It was a matter of national security. But Lisa, emboldened by her conviction, wasn't letting it go. She had already alerted other crew members, whispering her fears into the ears of anyone who would listen. Soon, the entire flight crew had their eyes on Maya. What started as a simple prejudice had escalated into full-blown suspicion, based on nothing more than Lisa's gut feeling and unconscious biases. As the plane began its descent, Maya's heart raced. Not from fear, but from the anticipation of what was to come. She was ready to follow the broker off the plane, to track his movements in the airport, and alert her team when the time was right. But the challenge wasn't just keeping an eye on the criminal now. It was doing so while under the constant scrutiny of a woman who was letting her own prejudices cloud her judgment. Maya could feel the tension thickening in the air. She could sense that something was about to break. And when it did, everything would change. The plane's gentle descent into the clouds brought a tension that Maya could feel building around her like a tightening vice. As they neared their destination, she focused intently on the broker, seated a few rows ahead. He was her priority. She had been tracking him for months, and this flight was her best shot at bringing him in. The moment they landed, she would need to be on him without hesitation. The rest of her team was waiting at the airport, ready to follow her lead. But Lisa, the air hostess, had other plans. Maya could see Lisa approaching from the corner of her eye. There was an unmistakable determination in her steps, and the thin veneer of politeness that Lisa had maintained during the earlier interactions was gone. This was no longer just a suspicious glance or an uncomfortable moment. This was a confrontation. Lisa stopped at Maya's row, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Miss, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me." Maya, who had been preparing to gather her things for landing, looked up in surprise. Her heart pounded, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her tone measured and even. She knew this wasn't a simple request. Lisa had decided to escalate, and Maya wasn't sure why. "There have been some concerns about your behavior during the flight," Lisa replied, her voice just loud enough to draw the attention of the nearby passengers. Eyes began to turn toward them, whispers already starting to spread. Maya felt the heat of humiliation rising in her chest, but she kept her composure. This wasn't the time or place to explain her true identity. Revealing her FBI credentials now would not only compromise her cover, but potentially alert the broker, who was still unaware of her presence. "Concerns about what, exactly?" Maya asked, forcing herself to remain seated, her voice firm but not confrontational. Lisa leaned in slightly, lowering her voice as if she were doing Maya a favor by keeping the conversation quiet, though the onlookers could still hear bits and pieces. "You've been acting suspiciously. We've had complaints from other passengers, and for the safety of everyone on board, we need to escort you to the front of the plane." Maya's mind raced. She knew there had been no complaints, at least none from the passengers. This was entirely Lisa's doing, driven by the air hostess's growing paranoia. The racial profiling was clear, and Maya could see that Lisa had convinced herself that Maya was a threat, simply because she didn't fit the image of who Lisa thought should be sitting in her section of the plane. "I haven't done anything wrong," Maya said quietly, her voice steady. "I've been sitting here the entire time, minding my own business. Whatever concerns you have are unfounded." But Lisa wasn't backing down. She nodded toward one of the other flight attendants, who was now standing by the aisle with a stern look on her face, clearly backing Lisa up. "We've discussed this with the captain. You need to come with us now." Maya knew she was running out of options. The situation was spiraling out of control, and with the plane nearing its landing, she couldn't afford to be escorted away from her seat. She needed to be close to the broker when they landed, ready to move the moment they disembarked. "I'm not going anywhere," Maya said firmly, her patience thinning. "There's no reason for me to leave my seat." The exchange had now drawn the attention of nearly every passenger in the immediate vicinity. Maya could feel the weight of their eyes on her, and she could hear the low murmur of voices around her. People were already making their own judgments, likely based on nothing more than the fact that an air hostess had labeled her as suspicious. Lisa's face hardened, and she took a step closer, her posture becoming even more aggressive. "If you refuse to comply, we'll have no choice but to involve security when we land." Maya's pulse quickened. This was getting worse by the second. If security became involved, it would blow her cover completely. The broker would know something was up, and he'd disappear the moment they set foot in the airport. Without revealing too much, Maya tried one last time to de-escalate the situation. "Listen," she said quietly, leaning forward slightly. "You're making a mistake. I'm not who you think I am. I'm not a threat." Lisa's expression flickered with confusion for a split second, before hardening again. "I'm just doing my job, ma'am. You need to come with me." Maya had no choice. If she resisted further, she risked creating a scene that would compromise her entire mission. But she wasn't about to make it easy for Lisa. She stood slowly, her movements controlled, and picked up her bag. As she stepped into the aisle, she noticed the stares intensifying. Some passengers looked confused, others wary. Maya could feel the burn of humiliation seeping into her chest, but she kept her head high. She wasn't going to let Lisa see her break. As she followed Lisa toward the front of the plane, the whispers grew louder. Maya's mind was racing, searching for a way out of this mess without compromising her mission. She could feel the anger building inside her, but she tamped it down. She needed to stay calm, no matter how unfair or humiliating this situation was. At the front of the plane, 2 more flight attendants stood waiting, their expressions a mix of concern and uncertainty. Maya stopped just before reaching them, her eyes narrowing. She wasn't about to go quietly. Before anyone could say another word, the plane began its final descent, and the captain's voice came over the intercom, instructing everyone to return to their seats. Lisa hesitated, clearly caught between following protocol and continuing her misguided pursuit of Maya. "We'll deal with this when we land," Lisa said sharply, motioning for Maya to sit in an empty seat near the front. Maya reluctantly complied, her mind still focused on the broker. She couldn't afford to lose him. The plane touched down smoothly, but the atmosphere inside was anything but calm. Maya's heart pounded in her chest as the plane taxied to the gate. She knew that the moment they disembarked, airport security would be waiting for her, thanks to Lisa's insistence. The broker, meanwhile, would likely slip away in the confusion, and everything Maya had worked for would be lost. As the plane came to a stop, the tension in the cabin reached its peak. The seatbelt sign turned off, and passengers began gathering their belongings. Maya's eyes darted toward the broker, who stood up and casually retrieved his bag from the overhead compartment. He was calm, unaware of the chaos brewing just a few rows behind him. But Maya's time was running out. Lisa had already radioed ahead, and 2 uniformed security officers were waiting just outside the plane's door. As the passengers began to file out, Lisa gestured toward them, signaling that they should stop Maya as she disembarked. Maya stood, gripping her bag tightly. She could feel the eyes of the other passengers on her, their judgment heavy in the air. She moved slowly toward the exit, her mind racing. She needed to find a way to maintain her cover and keep the mission intact. But with security waiting and Lisa hovering, her options were limited. As Maya approached the exit, the security officers stepped forward, blocking her path. "Ma'am, we need to speak with you," one of them said, his voice firm but polite. Maya glanced over her shoulder at Lisa, who stood a few feet away, watching with a look of smug satisfaction. Maya could feel the anger rising inside her again, but she forced it down. This wasn't the time to lose her cool. She reached into her bag, her movements deliberate, and pulled out her wallet. Slowly she flipped it open, revealing her FBI badge. The security officer's expressions shifted instantly, their eyes widening in surprise. "I'm a federal agent," Maya said, her voice calm but with an edge of steel. "And I've been conducting an undercover investigation on this flight. You're interfering with a federal operation." The air in the cabin shifted. Lisa's face paled as the weight of her mistake hit her like a freight train. The smugness vanished, replaced by a stunned silence. The security officers immediately stepped back, their postures now deferential. "I suggest you let me continue my work," Maya added, her eyes locking onto Lisa's, "before you do any more damage." The atmosphere inside the plane shifted dramatically as Maya revealed her FBI badge. What had once been a tense, confrontational situation between her and Lisa now became awkward, heavy with the realization that an enormous mistake had been made. Maya had felt humiliated and disrespected just moments ago, but now the tables had turned, and the truth had exposed the injustice that had unfolded. The 2 security officers who had been waiting at the exit immediately withdrew their hands, both stepping back and exchanging uneasy glances. They hadn't expected to be detaining a federal agent, much less one in the middle of an active investigation. Their postures changed instantly, going from authoritative to apologetic. Maya, however, wasn't focused on them. Her gaze was fixed on Lisa. The air hostess stood frozen, her once smug demeanor completely drained. Her face had gone pale and her lips trembled as she opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Maya could see it in Lisa's eyes. She was beginning to understand the full weight of what she had done. The silence that hung between them was thick with unspoken truths. The assumptions, the judgments, the accusations, all of them had stemmed from Lisa's prejudice, and now she was standing face to face with the reality of her actions. Lisa's rigid sense of right and wrong, her biases about what a suspicious person looked like, had led her to wrongfully target Maya, an FBI agent working to protect the very people Lisa had claimed she was trying to protect. Maya took a deep breath, her calm exterior betraying the torrent of emotions beneath. She had worked too hard, too long, to let something like this derail her mission. But the sting of the humiliation she had endured, the racial profiling that had nearly cost her everything, still simmered inside her. She had faced bias before. It was, sadly, a reality of her life. But this was different. It had gone beyond casual glances and discomfort. Lisa had used her position of authority to publicly humiliate and detain Maya, all based on false assumptions. Without saying another word, Maya turned away from Lisa and faced the security officers. "Where is the broker?" she asked sharply. Her mission wasn't over, and she needed to focus on the task at hand. One of the officers, still visibly rattled by the turn of events, cleared his throat. "The man you're following is in the terminal, Agent Carter. He's being watched by your team." Relief washed over Maya. At least the mission hadn't been completely compromised. The broker was still within reach, and her team was in position. The situation on the plane had been a disaster, but Maya had managed to keep her cover intact just long enough to stay on track. Maya adjusted her bag on her shoulder and moved toward the exit. She had no interest in speaking further with Lisa or the crew. Her mission took priority, but just as she reached the door, she felt a hand lightly touch her arm. She turned to see Lisa standing there, her expression a mixture of guilt, regret, and fear. I'm so sorry," Lisa stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't realize. I didn't mean." Maya held up a hand, cutting her off. "You didn't mean to what? Assume I was a threat because I didn't fit your idea of what a normal passenger looks like?" Maya's voice was low but steady, each word landing with precision. "You saw me, you judged me, and you acted without any real evidence. You let your biases guide you, and now, look where it's gotten us." Lisa's eyes filled with tears, but Maya had no sympathy left to give. She had been too professional, too composed for too long. This was the consequence of Lisa's actions, and Maya wasn't going to comfort her for it. Maya turned back toward the exit, leaving Lisa standing there in silence, with her shame hanging in the air like a thick fog. She felt the weight of the passengers' stares as she left the plane, but she didn't care. She had a job to do, and there was no time to dwell on the drama that had unfolded in the air. Maya walked swiftly through the jet bridge, her mind already shifting gears as she thought about the next steps in the operation. As soon as she stepped into the terminal, her team was there to meet her. Special Agent John Simmons, her partner on the case, approached her with concern etched across his face. "Maya, what happened on the plane?" he asked, keeping his voice low as they walked quickly through the terminal. "It's taken care of," Maya replied tersely, not wanting to get into the details just yet. "The broker?" Simmons nodded. "We've got eyes on him. He's heading toward the baggage claim now. We'll follow him from there." Maya let out a breath of relief. Despite the chaos on the plane, the operation was still intact. She couldn't afford to think about anything else right now. They had come too far to let the broker slip away. They moved quickly through the terminal, blending into the crowds as they followed the broker at a safe distance. Maya's mind was sharp, her focus fully on the task at hand. She could see the broker up ahead, a tall, well-dressed man who looked like any other businessman traveling for work. But she knew better. This man was responsible for countless illegal operations, and today was the day they would finally bring him in. As they reached the baggage claim area, Maya spotted several more agents in place, strategically positioned to ensure the broker had no escape routes. The tension in the air was palpable as the team moved into position. Maya's heart pounded in her chest as she signaled to her team, her eyes locked on the broker. Everything happened quickly after that. The team moved in seamlessly, surrounding the broker and apprehending him before he even realized what was happening. Maya watched as the broker was handcuffed and led away, her chest tightening with a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion. The mission had been a success, despite everything that had gone wrong on the plane. As the adrenaline began to fade, Maya found herself standing alone for a moment, watching as the broker was escorted out of the terminal. The weight of the day pressed down on her, and she couldn't help but think back to what had happened with Lisa. It wasn't just the humiliation or the inconvenience. It was the deeper pain of being judged and treated unfairly, even in a moment when she was doing everything right. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking her thoughts. It was a message from her superior, commending her on the successful apprehension of the broker. Maya allowed herself a small, tired smile. Despite everything, she had done her job, and that was what mattered most. As she walked through the terminal to rejoin her team, Maya knew that this was only the beginning. Lisa's actions wouldn't go unpunished. There would be consequences for the way she had handled things on the plane, and Maya would make sure that the airline knew exactly what had happened. Karma was already at work, and Maya could sense that Lisa's journey was far from over. Days had passed since the chaotic flight, and the weight of the incident still lingered in Maya's thoughts. The broker had been successfully apprehended, and the FBI's investigation had wrapped up with minimal disruptions. By all accounts, Maya had completed her mission with precision, despite the personal turmoil she had faced during the flight. But the events on that plane, the prejudice she had encountered, were not so easily forgotten. Back at headquarters, Maya sat at her desk, sifting through paperwork from the case. She had filed an official report about the incident with the airline, detailing Lisa's discriminatory behavior and how it had nearly jeopardized the mission. Maya had written the report with the same professionalism she brought to every aspect of her work. But this time, there was an added edge, a determination to ensure that what happened to her wouldn't happen to anyone else. The airline had responded quickly, issuing a formal apology to Maya and promising a full investigation into the matter. But apologies, Maya knew, were just the beginning. Words were easy. Real accountability and change were what mattered. She had no interest in retribution or ruining someone's life, but Lisa needed to understand the consequences of her actions. There had to be a reckoning. A knock at her office door interrupted her thoughts. It was her partner, John Simmons, who had been with her at the airport after the arrest. He stepped inside, a sympathetic expression on his face. "Maya, you've got a visitor," he said, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty. "It's the air hostess from the flight. Lisa." Maya's chest tightened at the mention of Lisa's name. She hadn't expected to see her again, certainly not so soon, and definitely not here. Part of her wanted to refuse the meeting outright, to turn Lisa away and focus on her work. But another part of her, the part that had spent her entire career standing up for what was right, knew that this confrontation was inevitable. Maya nodded. "Send her in." A moment later, Lisa entered the office, looking nothing like the confident, authoritative air hostess who had confronted Maya on the plane. Her posture was slouched, her face pale and lined with exhaustion. There was no sign of the smug superiority that had fueled her actions that day. Instead, she looked small, uncertain, and ashamed. "Agent Carter," Lisa began, her voice quiet and strained. "Thank you for agreeing to see me. I know I have no right to be here, but I needed to talk to you. I needed to apologize, properly." Maya stayed silent, watching her closely. She had heard plenty of apologies in her life, but she was waiting to see if this one held any real weight. Lisa took a deep breath, as if gathering the courage to continue. "I've been suspended from my job while the airline investigates. They've received multiple complaints from passengers about my behavior, and, well, they're taking it seriously. I could lose my job over this." Maya leaned back in her chair, folding her arms across her chest. She could feel the anger and frustration rising again, but she kept her expression calm. "Is that why you're here, Lisa? Because you're worried about losing your job?" Lisa's face crumpled slightly, but she shook her head. "No. I mean, yes, I'm scared about my job, but that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I know I was wrong. I know that I let my own biases affect how I treated you, and I realize now just how serious that was. I shouldn't have judged you. I shouldn't have assumed the worst just because you didn't fit into my idea of what was normal for a passenger." Maya remained silent, letting Lisa's words sink in. She could hear the sincerity in Lisa's voice, but it wasn't enough. She needed to know if Lisa had really understood the damage she had caused. "You didn't just judge me, Lisa," Maya said, her voice calm but firm. "You humiliated me. You treated me like a criminal, publicly in front of everyone on that plane. You ignored my rights, and in doing so you nearly compromised an entire FBI operation. Your actions weren't just a mistake, they were dangerous." Lisa nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I know. I've been replaying it all in my head since it happened, and I've realized that I did more than just act out of fear. I acted out of prejudice, and that's something I need to face. I know saying I'm sorry doesn't fix what I did, but I want you to know that I'm going to make sure I learn from this. I'm going to try to do better. I'm going to try to be better. For a long moment, Maya didn't respond. She had spent years dealing with the subtle and not so subtle forms of racism and prejudice that came with being a black woman in positions of authority. She had fought against these biases her entire life, but this time, the stakes had been different. This time, her dignity had been publicly attacked in a way that cut deeper than usual. Maya stood from her desk, walking around to stand in front of Lisa. I'm not here to forgive you on the spot, Lisa, she said, her voice steady. What you did hurt. And it's not just about me. You need to understand that your actions reflect a larger problem in how we, as a society, treat people who don't fit into our preconceived notions of what's normal or safe. You need to take responsibility for that, not just with me, but with every person you'll interact with going forward. Lisa wiped at her eyes, nodding. I will. I swear, I will. Maya took a deep breath, the anger that had simmered for days finally starting to ease. She could see the remorse in Lisa's face, and while it didn't erase what had happened, it was a start. Maya knew that real change didn't come from punishment alone. It came from acknowledgement, from accountability, and from the willingness to be better. I hope you do, Maya said softly. I hope you take this experience and grow from it. Because if you don't, you'll find yourself repeating these same mistakes over and over again. Lisa nodded once more, her face a mixture of regret and gratitude. Thank you, Agent Carter. I really do appreciate you giving me this chance to apologize. Maya gave her a small nod. Take care of yourself, Lisa, and make sure that the next time you're in a position of authority, you use it wisely. With that, Lisa quietly left the office, leaving Maya alone once again. The air felt lighter now, as if a weight had been lifted, but there was still a lingering heaviness in her heart. The truth was, this wasn't just about Lisa. It wasn't just about that one flight. It was about the broader issue of prejudice and how it infected so many interactions, so many moments of life, in ways big and small. Maya returned to her desk and sat down, staring at the paperwork before her. She knew she couldn't change the world in a day, and she couldn't single-handedly fix the biases that people like Lisa carried. But she could hold them accountable. She could stand tall, knowing that her work, her mission, was bigger than the small-mindedness of a few people. She had faced prejudice and come out stronger. And while the road ahead would undoubtedly bring more challenges, more moments where she would have to fight against those same ingrained assumptions, Maya knew she was ready for it. She had spent her life confronting injustice, and she wasn't about to stop now. As she picked up her pen and resumed her work, Maya felt a sense of closure. Karma had already begun to work its way through Lisa's life, and Maya knew that her part in this story was over. Now, it was time to focus on the future and on the next mission, wherever it might lead. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Click on the video now to watch. We appreciate your support, and we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.